Hi, I'm Diane Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of The Baby Doll Serial Killer, no other than Miss B.R. Bates.
Hello.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Billy, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Thank you for the opportunity. I am a longtime writer. I'm trained in the journalism field. I have a bachelor's degree in journalism from Michigan State University. Grew up in Michigan and have been a writer all my life. Was even a writer when I was a little kid. I just always wanted to write. Didn't really know that I would go into journalism. I thought I would do more fiction writing. I wanted to write like novels and other books, but found myself in journalism and did enjoy it. I spent a few years in the city of Detroit working at the Detroit News. I also worked at the Saginaw News in Saginaw, Michigan. I worked at the Wausau Daily Herald in Wausau, Wisconsin. And so I spent about 10 years in the daily newspaper industry. And then from there, I moved to corporate world and worked for some different companies in Michigan and other states. I went into ministry for a few years and wound up after living in northern Michigan and in Georgia and on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., moved back to Michigan several years ago and have been working from home on my writing projects as well as working on editing websites for federal government.
Miss B.R. Bates, thank you so much for sharing your talent to the world. So, what details about John Eric Armstrong bringing an early life might have contributed to his criminal behavior?
That's always an interesting question. And I think that's something that people tend to wonder about a serial killer. We tend to wonder, okay, what was it that cooked this killer? What factors did he have in his upbringing? What's happened to him in his life to make him this way? And, I'm really conflicted on that question of nature versus nurture because I do have to wonder if brain chemistry has something to do with some of the killers that we've known about over the years. As far as John Eric Armstrong, his childhood seemed pretty normal. He had a mom and a dad, and he had siblings. He had a baby brother when he was very young. He was only about 5 or 6 years old when his mom had another baby, and he loved his baby brother very much, but his baby brother did die. And we do know that that had a pretty big effect on Armstrong. He was very heartbroken when his baby brother died. But other than that, his biological father left the home shortly after the baby brother died. And I know that that had an effect on Armstrong too. Other than that, his childhood really was not unusual in any way, I would say. And he always struck people growing up as a pretty normal person, just a little quiet, not very gregarious, maybe a little shy.
Mhm. Yes. Is it the same with Hannibal Lecter?
Oh, what a comparison, huh?
What a comparison. So, Miss Billy, how did Armstrong's time in the U.S. Navy influence his movements and the scope of his crimes?
When he was arrested in Detroit, it was April 2000. We know that he killed 5 people in Detroit after he was discharged from the Navy. And we also know he attacked 5 other people who survived. But at the time that he was arrested in April 2000, he confessed to committing murders while he was in the Navy in the years leading up to that in the 1990s. He claimed to have killed about 10 additional people when he traveled for the Navy. He was aboard the USS Nimitz and traveled to all sorts of places around the world, went to Hong Kong and Singapore, went to Hawaii, and Washington State is where the Nimitz was home ported. And so he did spend quite a bit of time in Washington State, and he claimed to have killed 2 people there. He claimed to have killed 1 person in Virginia, a couple people in Hawaii, and then, like I said, various international ports where the Nimitz visited. So you would say, some would speculate that the Navy allowed him the opportunity to commit these crimes if he did indeed do these murders that he confessed to when he was arrested in Detroit. But other than that, the Navy was a career for him for a while, from about 1992 to 1999 or so. And I think it was a career from my research that he appeared to be pretty proud of, just aside from the possible crimes that he committed.
So, Miss Billy, what were some early warning signs or red flags in Armstrong's behavior before his first known crime?
They talk about the McDonald triad, the bedwetting, setting fires, and animal cruelty. That's a really well-known in the psychology field. What some claim are possible markers that serial killers have when they're growing up. And I've been researching another serial killer that worked in Detroit years earlier, Benjamin Atkins, for another book project that's going to be book 2 in this series that's coming out next year. And he actually did set fires as a kid. So he has one of those markers that we know of. We don't know if he had the other 2. And then I've been reading a book about Dennis Rader, BTK, and he had a couple of those markers. He set fires and he tortured and killed cats. So as a kid, as a teenager or whatever. And so maybe, some people think that the McDonald triad does not exist, and those are not real markers for serial killers. I really have to wonder if those are markers for serial killers. But back to Armstrong, I can find no evidence in any of the research I did, any of the people that I spoke with who knew him growing up. I find no evidence of any of those markers, nothing that would indicate any of those 3 things. And I know that's just part of the picture, but when you're talking about things that, like I said earlier, might cook a serial killer, might influence him to go on to take human life, there really was nothing in his background that seemed to be a motivator.
So, Miss Billy, can you tell us the research process of the
Oh,
baby
wow.
doll?
Yes. It took about, I would say, 4 or 5 years to research the case, to do all the interviews. I started with the files. I had some files to begin with my collaborator, Dr. Gerald Cliff. He worked the case when it was happening in Detroit. He was the leader of the Violent Crime Task Force, the interagency task force that worked the case in Detroit. So I had some files to start with, and then I completed FOIA requests for files from any other entity that I could possibly think of. This included the other jurisdictions that were involved in this case in the Detroit area. It crossed city lines into Dearborn and Dearborn Heights. So there actually were 3 different police departments who investigated Armstrong during his time living here in Michigan. So completed FOIA requests for them and for the Wayne County Medical Examiner for the autopsy reports, and for NCIS. I completed a FOIA request for the FBI, and they shut me down, wouldn't give me any files, even though the FBI did investigate the case when he was arrested. So beyond all that, the more enjoyable part of the research actually was reaching out to people to interview, and in particular, any family members I could find of the 5 women who lost their lives. That was very, very important to me. And that was the most rewarding part of the research, was finding people to speak for those 5 gals who encountered Armstrong and were killed by him. And then also the survivors, the 5 survivors. I was able to talk to 2 of them. One of them has passed on since the time of the case. I touched base with another one that lives out west, and she declined to interview. And then the 5th one is in the wind. We don't know where that person is. So it is so interesting because, for one thing, I loved speaking to the 2 survivors that I was able to speak to. Their stories are, to me, very much stories of survival and encouragement. And I'm blessed to have spoken to them and to know them even still and be in touch with them still a couple of years later, a couple of years after I spoke to them. But then reaching out to the family members of the victims, what I found the common thread very much is that each one of these 5 women who were killed, they were living a life at risk out on the street. They were working prostitutions. They were, I think, most of them involved in drugs, and that really was what took them out to the street. And so hearing the stories of these 5 women from their family members or from their friends who spoke for them was really, really moving, because their stories were just like anybody else's story. That could have been my life, but for the grace of God. That could have been anybody's life. Their lives started out very normal. They had loving families for the most part. And it generally, the pattern that I saw was the pattern of addiction. And that is such a big part of this story. Addiction is what put them out on the street and put them in the path of Armstrong. And so that's a big takeaway from this story. I hope people do get that, because I really don't think we talk about addiction enough or do enough about addiction in this country, or really even in this world. There's so much more addiction around us than I think we realize. And so that was a very interesting part of the story, to learn about these women and to meet them. I wanted to meet them, and I really did get to meet them, because I did find at least one person to speak for all 5 of them. So yeah, wow. And one thing, and you're talking about, like you asked about the research process, I did develop a process, and I used Facebook a lot. I'll tell you, Facebook was very, very helpful in finding people, because people share so much on Facebook,
Yes.
But I found that in reaching out, it's such a delicate subject matter. I mean, if I were in their position, would I want to talk about my dead sister, my dead mom, especially under these kind of circumstances, killed by a serial killer? Would I want to do that? I don't know if I would. And so understanding that you really have to approach them with a lot of compassion and delicately, very expressing a lot of sorrow for their loss. And sometimes you have to reach out to them and then just let the message that you sent sit for a while. I call it percolating for a while, because they may not want to respond now. They may respond later, and sometimes they have to think about it. Sometimes they don't respond at all. I did put out a lot of feelers for people that I never heard back from, and I totally understand that. Again, if I were in that position, I don't know what I would do. And so it is a challenge. It's a challenge I enjoy, but it's a challenge that you have to approach carefully.
Interesting research, Miss. Really interesting. So, why was Armstrong referred to as the baby doll killer?
He had a nickname that he shared with his wife. For one thing, it was on the plate on the front of his Jeep that he drove. When he and his wife were discharged from the Navy, he had met her on the Nimitz, and they were discharged from the Navy, and they stayed in Norfolk, where the Nimitz was at the time, for maintenance for a little while. So they stayed in Norfolk for a while, and he bought a new Jeep Wrangler. I think it was in 1998. And so then he brought that to Michigan when they moved to Michigan in 1999, the following year. And he had a plate on the front of it that said baby doll. So when he was going to the streets of Detroit, in particular Michigan Avenue, which is a very thriving area of prostitution in Detroit, when he was going there to look for females to pick up and eventually often strangle, he was driving this Jeep with baby doll on the front, which is a little crazy and ironic. But it was just an affectionate nickname that he and his wife shared.
Oh, okay. Derived from the nickname itself. So, Miss Billy, what would be your advice for those people out there want to write their own stories, novels, or anything else?
I Yeah, it seems like it's human nature to want to write. I have met
Yes.
so many people, almost everyone I talk to, I think, wants to write something, whether it's a book or a blog or just anything at all, a short story, who knows? It seems like everybody has a book in them that they want to do. I wish I had a dime for every time I've heard that. And often, if anybody ever asks me for advice about that, I generally tell them just start writing. Don't worry about making it perfect. And I'll tell you, Daniel, that I listened to some of your prior episodes this past week, and there was another writer. I think her name was Kat, who said basically the same thing that I'm
Yes.
saying now. And you remember that. So
Yes.
don't worry about making it perfect. Don't worry about it being published right now. Just start writing. And I tell people you can always rearrange it later. You can always edit it later. Call up, like sit in front of your laptop and call up a blank Microsoft Word document and just write down your thoughts. Maybe just put down a bullet list of ideas that you've got in your head and just let it sit there for a while and go back to it later and maybe flesh out some of those ideas, and eventually you'll be creating a narrative for your story. But just get stuff down on paper, so to speak, virtual paper, electronic paper like Microsoft Word, or even paper, because I do use that still myself. I do like
Yeah.
writing on paper. I don't write that way, but I write other things like lists and stuff. I'm not totally electronic like a lot of people are nowadays. I do still like paper. But yeah, just start writing and putting down ideas, and you can, like I said, rearrange it later. But it just frees you. It frees you, because I think people are sometimes constrained by this idea that they need to sit in front of their computer and they need to write out the perfect outline, or start writing the first chapter of their book and just go in order, and it has to be a certain way, and it's not that way at all. You may make some notes, you may do some research, you may change your notes, you may go in a totally different direction. But if
Yes.
you're free to just type whatever you want to type and then figure, I'll look at it later and I'll see how it sounds to me then, if you free yourself in that way, it just helps the creative process so much. And so I never, like, I have written some novels in my life, and I've written a lot of other books that are totally opposite of true crime. And I don't know if I've ever even done an outline. I've never really followed the rules that people seem to think that there are for writing. I just start writing and I let it lead me where it's going to lead me. And so that would be the advice that I would have for other aspiring writers.
Yes. Typewriter is still recommended, people. If you have a
Yes, I
typewriter.
still own one. It's in the closet
Wow.
back there. I used it in high
Awesome.
school.
Awesome. So, Miss Billy, what are your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
Short-term goals. There is the second book in this series coming out next year. Right now, it's scheduled for spring 2025. The book about Benjamin Atkins, and I'll be doing a lot of promotions for that. I'm trying to build up some social media channels. It seems to be an uphill battle. It seems like I was lamenting the other day to someone that it seems like the internet has changed in the past 10, 15 years. Um, the good thing about the internet, for those of us who lived life, some of our lives before the internet, and then we lived so much of our lives after the internet came along, the good thing about the internet is that it gives everybody a voice. And sometimes the bad thing about the internet is that it gives everybody a voice, in that there is so much content. I listen to podcasts like yours and other podcasts I want to listen to, and I don't have enough hours in the day to listen to all the podcasts I actually do want to listen to.
Yes.
There's just so much content to consume now. And I feel like because of that, on the internet now, that there's a lot of competition for real estate, for lack of a better word, for listenership, for a lot of competition for viewers and listeners to cut through all that noise. Like, there's so much noise going on, and how do you stand out with that? How do you be the podcast or be the book that they choose to read? So
Yes.
that is a challenge, because I feel like 10, 15 years ago, it would have been easier to get to build social media channels and to get likes and follows and all of that, and to get readership. And so short-term goal is continuing to work on the social media channels that I've been building, both for this book and then for the second book when it's released. And then I do still want to do more true crime. I do write in another genre, the pop culture genre. And so I'm continuing to work on a couple projects in that area too, a couple book projects. And so I'm just going to keep writing. I'm aiming for 100, and I'm going to keep writing as long as I can have coherent thoughts for that. So years and
For
years
sure.
from now, I hope to still be producing the written word in some fashion. So I guess the short answer is I'm just going to keep writing.
Keep writing. Looking forward for more books to come, Miss Billy. And good luck to your goals. What
Thank you.
lessons did law enforcement learn from the investigation and prosecution of Armstrong's crimes?
Oh, if my collaborator, Jerry Cliff, was here, he could tell you easily. But listening to him talk about the case over the past several years, I would say, they had a very quick arrest from the time that they made a discovery of 3 of his victims on the same day they discovered 3 of the 5 women at the railroad tracks at Military and John Kronk in Detroit and southwest Detroit. And so it was only a day and a half later when they arrested him. But I think one takeaway or one lesson about Armstrong is appearances can be deceiving. To this day, if you talk to
Yes.
Armstrong, to this day, he is very disarming. He is very innocent seeming. He's very friendly. He's very nice. And that's the way he's been all of his life. And I think serial killers, to a certain degree, they learn to live a sort of double life. And the people who are closest to them are not even aware of this double life. And so he led a secret life that no one else knew about. And so I think for law enforcement, when they discovered the bodies at the railroad tracks, the 3 females there, they even talked to an FBI profiler. And the FBI profiler made an attempt to, I think, to understand who this perpetrator could be. But they also told and this is probably a good lesson that law enforcement did learn from the investigation. The FBI contact in Detroit told a member of the Violent Crime Task Force that, you're concentrating on his successes, the people he's killed. You need to concentrate on his failures, because there are people out there who probably survived him that he did not actually kill, but that he attacked. And they were absolutely right, because there were 5 other females that we know of that he attacked who survived. And so that was a good lesson, I think, for the investigating officers there. And they did actually talk to 4 of those people at the time of the case, and they queued up 4 of them to testify in court against Armstrong, although 1 dropped out. And then the 5th person was not known about at that time of the case, was only known in more recent years. So it's interesting that it was an interesting way to look at it, to kind of turn it around. In that, okay, you're concentrating on these 3 women you found at the railroad tracks, but somebody out there knows something. And even beyond the survivors, I think there were people when the police went to the street and talked to some of the other women who were living there at risk. There was scuttlebutt. There were rumors going around. This person was missing, and that person was missing, and so police, I think, were able to get quite a bit of intel from the women out there too, who not necessarily survived an attack, but just had heard things.
So, Miss Billy, to sum up our discussion for today, how has the case influenced public awareness of transient serial killers and their ability to evade capture across jurisdictions?
Back when Armstrong was killing people, this is in the 90s and 2000, and this was probably the edge of what I would call the heyday of serial killers. There aren't as many serial killers now. I just saw the news report today about the suspected Long Island serial killer, and that is a case that's happening right now. And to me, that's a rarity right now because technology has advanced so much. For one thing, you step outside your door and you've got a camera on you wherever you go. There are video cameras. There are people with their phones video cameraing things, video recording things. And so it's hard to do anything in this world right now without being captured on video. And then DNA has advanced. Police techniques for investigating crimes, forensics have all advanced, and to where nowadays it is hard for a potential serial killer to take a second life. So I think there's that consideration. And back when Armstrong was operating, it was easier for him to fly below the radar. He wasn't being videotaped everywhere he went. And when you're talking about being aboard the USS Nimitz and going to Hong Kong, for instance, or Singapore, or wherever, he wasn't getting off the ship and going into a bar and being captured on video. He wasn't especially in these foreign locales, he was not being recorded in any way, and it was easy for him to kill, most likely, and then be back on the ship and be gone. So he killed in a different era, and that's a big consideration. Thankfully, our investigations into serials have gotten a lot better over the years, and there aren't as many now.
Definitely. So, Ms. BR Billy, thank you so much for sharing your book to the world. And we are looking forward for more books to come. So can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I just actually about a week ago bought the domain brbates.com. So I have that up and running. That's exciting. And then I am on Instagram and also Pinterest and YouTube. So just look for BR Bates in those different places. And Goodreads too. I enjoy Goodreads.
Yes, people, let's support Miss BR Bates, because if you support her, as I said, more books to come. So, Miss Billy, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon. You are most welcome to come back, Miss Billy, if you have a new book to promote.